things, that I've mentioned the misconceptions, there are some things that you do need to watch out for, and I'll mention what those are. The first is there's going to be constant change, right? Even Heather mentioned they've just moved in and they've already outgrown, right? So this is a real reality of a number of early stage startups, is just the headcount alone will change week over week, month over month, depending on the growth rate. So you've got that. You've got a lot of new people coming in. You've got to be able to handle working with a new set of people, even with a new person. I remember times at Mint where I was constantly training people. It didn't feel like I was building anything new. Instead, I was just doing a brain dump every few days. So you've got to be comfortable with that. The other is, of course, the change in terms of the product itself, right? The product's going to be evolving. There's going to be a lot of things that you're going to need to contribute and other people are going to contribute. So you've got to be okay with making those changes. You're going to get feedback from customers. You're going to get feedback from your own team, and you're going to have to make that. So if you're someone that needs to get a spec and just do that, it's not the right environment, right? You've got to be okay with, hey, this has to change. We did it this way yesterday, but turns out all the customers hate it. So we're going to change it to meet that feedback. So you've got to be okay with that. The other change that can often happen, can be positive or negative, is an influx of money. So whether you get a lot of capital or whether your revenue starts to grow up, this means you're growing, right? Which means you're going to have more headcount, you're going to expand, and you've got to be okay with that level of change. You either have to adapt to it, or you have to say, you know what, I'm an early stage person. That's what I love to do, and I'm going to go find another early stage startup to nurture, right? And keep that in mind, is just because all this change is happening doesn't mean that you always have to adapt, but you have to know where you're comfortable up to, and if you don't feel comfortable continuing with that, then it's okay, right? This isn't you've got to stick around, no one's holding a gun up to your head to stick around. You can certainly decide when you want to leave. Now, there will be some chaos, right? And I say that in a positive light, because that chaos can actually be positive, right? You could be growing so much that, hey, your servers just can't handle the capacity anymore, and you've got to figure out a way to scale this. Or, you might have that disgruntled customer who's like, oh, this is really a crappy product, I'm out of here. They'll happen, it's few and far between. So that's some level of chaos, and you kind of have to accept it, and you kind of just keep rolling with the punches. That's another sort of up and down that happens in those early stages, because you're finding a fit. You're trying to figure out, here's a product, does the market like it? Do I like it? Do I like working with the team? So there's going to be some of that chaos, but if it's a good startup, if it's a startup that's making progress, it'll start to stabilize. I'm not going to tell you when, because each startup kind of has its own trajectory, but it usually happens within about a year to 2 years. It's not like a 5-year firefighting brigade, so don't feel like, gosh, I've got to wait this out. It's certainly not the case, right? But there will be some level of chaos. The key is, do people then decide in those moments of chaos to take a step back, put some process in place, deal with the growing pains, and get to the next level? Or are they just kind of constantly operating that? And that's a good test of, is that the kind of startup you want to work at or not? Now, if you are somebody who needs to have a manager, a mentor, or some form of guidance where they very clearly lay out for you, here are the steps, here's how you start off at an entry level, here's how you get to a manager, mid-level, and an executive level, that's fine. But it's not possible at an early stage startup. And the reason is because you're moving so fast, you're results oriented, you're product centric, right? And so everything is kind of going into those goals that there just isn't always time to give you that nurturing career advice that you would want. Doesn't mean that your career isn't going to advance, right? Remember, you're still learning, you're still growing. But if you need to have those kind of milestones, if you need to have like a performance review and things like that, then chances are an early stage is just not going to be a good fit, right? You might want to wait until the company's at more like 50 to 100 people, maybe even 200 people, when there's a little bit more process. They do have some yearly reviews, they're keeping track of all of that. But in those early stages, your advancement is going to be learning to build a product, learning to sustain the company, and keeping those as your primary goals. So you have to take a little bit of a step back from your own personal goals, but know that if you're learning, then you are advancing. The minute you stop learning in an early stage startup, it's an indication that that startup isn't going anywhere and that you aren't advancing. So use that as your metric. So now that I've said that, the same thing is true about getting help, right? If you are working on a design or if you're solving an engineering problem and it's a small team, then chances are not everybody is going to be able to pitch in and help because they might just not have the expertise, right? Now, what I mean by this is your team might not have the expertise. That doesn't mean you can't go out and get help from somewhere else, right? There are a lot of folks who love to advise startups, who love to mentor engineers and designers and PMs who are all in startups. And this is a great opportunity to make use of that network, right? So don't feel like you can't get outside help. In fact, in a startup, sometimes the entire team can have this kind of tunnel vision that unless they bring somebody in new to help, they're not going to be able to overcome a problem, right? So keep that in mind. It doesn't have to feel like, once again, the fate of the company or the product is on everyone's shoulders within the company. You can certainly get help from outside. Now, when you're getting started in a startup, the founder is supposed to set the vision. But the tricky part is, the founder may have some sense of a vision. It might be a little bit blurry. And that's okay, right? As long as he or she has a 6-month or a 9-month roadmap in place. The problem happens if they've got no idea and they're like one day, making Facebook apps and then the next day they're trying to solve cancer, right? That's a little bit disjointed. But in general, it might be like, well, we tried this out with consumers, that didn't work, so we're gonna pivot and we're gonna do something B2B. We're gonna keep the product still the same, we might have to change it, right? So that I want you to get comfortable with. Now you can obviously make the choice of, well, that's not my expertise, or I don't really like that direction, and once again, you have the freedom to leave. But you have to realize that these kind of changes do happen because it takes the founders a little bit of time to get that specific vision. Some founders have it. I'm not saying that every founder has blurred vision, but in the vast majority of cases, it's a little bit blurry, so you have to accommodate, and at least they have to give you a sense that they've got a plan for the next 6 to 12 months. Now, there's also very, very stark changes in direction, right? This will happen. There may be times where companies decide to pivot entirely away from what they had originally intended to do. And once again, kind of up to you to say, well, did I join this company to be a gaming company, or did I join it for its original intent, right? You've got to make that decision when those direction changes happen. And you've got to find out how much you believe in it, right? Now, there's also going to be a lot of experiments, right? You're going to be experimenting with the type of features, the type of customers you go after, and even the product itself. So if that happens, right, you've got to be okay with those kinds of experiments. If you're someone like, nope, I have like one cereal I eat, I have like one thing I do a day, and then I go to bed, then if you're that regimented, it's okay, but early stage is not going to be right for you, because in those early stages, you've got to experiment, you've got to figure out what's going to be, sticky in the market. And so to get comfortable with that, you kind of have to do a number of experiments. Right? But you've got to figure out when to turn off some experiments. So use that once again as a barometer of, are we doing a lot, but then we're turning things off that aren't working, not just that we're doing everything at once.